So published in the journal Perspectives on Sexual and Reproductive Health is this study, Reasons U.S. Women Have Abortions, checking off as many answers they felt applied to them. And so there's some overlapping answers. They include life disruption, right? Interference with school or career, unemployment or poverty, relationships, right? Their current relationship is just too unstable, or they're trying to avoid single parenthood. Job disruption, completed family size, right? They're just done having children. Education costs. They're personally unready physically or emotionally. The baby's potential health, the mother's health, or sexual assault. The study concludes, while a small percentage of women have abortions due to personal health concerns or fetal anomalies, the large majority choose termination because of unplanned pregnancies. Which wasn't surprising to me, that abortion is used mostly as a form of birth control, but I was surprised to learn that only 1% of the time the reason was for sexual assault, since it's one of the most common arguments I hear pro-abortionists make, which goes something like, why should a teenage girl or a woman who's been horribly victimized prolong that victimization of her body by carrying and bearing her abuser's child? Right? So what about cases of sexual assault? I mean, it's a legitimate question we Christian pro-lifers can't just coldly brush off by saying because abortion murders a person made in God's image, which we've been reading about in Genesis chapter 1, right? Verse 27, God created man in his image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female, he created them. And in verse 31, God saw everything that he had made, and indeed it was very good. Meaning the child's life in the womb, regardless how he or she was conceived, is made, male or female, in God's image, personally valuable to God. But since the woman is also made in God's image, just as valuable to God, why do we Christians think God prefers to sacrifice her future for the child's? Especially in cases of sexual assault where she was an unwilling participant in the pregnancy she never wanted. That pregnancy being something was done to her. So why not sacrifice the child's future for hers instead? Well, we'll see this morning in Scripture whether the reason to abort is sexual assault, interference with life goals, or being abysmally impoverished, why carrying and birthing that child is the only way to protect and highly value, as God does, not only that child's life and future and the woman's life and future, but God's plan for valuing the life and future of that family. All right, so first, continuing the pregnancy to best value the life and future of that child, it just doesn't matter if it's only an unwanted biological part of a woman's body like a tumor. But it matters tremendously if it is instead a real living person made and valued by God, which is what Isaiah says it is in chapter 49, verse 1. The Lord called me within the womb, within the body of my mother. He named me. So according to Isaiah, God didn't give a call to some biological clump in the womb or name an inside part of the mother's body, right? But according to Isaiah, God called and named him while still located in the womb. Right? So God not only saw Isaiah in the womb as a person, but as a different person from the mother who's carrying him. Just like he did with the prophet Jeremiah, chapter 1, verse 5. Before you came forth from the womb, I consecrated you, and I ordained you a prophet. Right, so again, God didn't consecrate a biological substance in the mother's womb or ordain an inside part of her body. Right? God himself says he consecrated and ordained Jeremiah. Right? So God also saw Jeremiah while located in the womb as a real person and as a person separate from the mother who's carrying him. Right? So whether Isaiah or Jeremiah or anyone's location is inside or outside of a womb, for God, their valued personhood status remains unchanged. Right? But how far back do we go? Right? At what stage of development did that life become God's image, personally valued by him? Well, David thought all the way back. Psalm 139. You formed my inward parts. You covered me in my mother's womb. I will praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are your works, and that my soul knows very well. Your eyes saw my substance being yet unformed, and in your book they were all written, the days fashioned for me, when as yet there were none of them. David refers to himself with all these first-person pronouns, my, me, I, as if there's no difference between what he is, the person writing this psalm, and what he was in the womb. In fact, even before he had any substance at all, God was being attentive to David, having a plan and a purpose for his life ahead. God valuing David's image-bearing personhood at least as far back as the fertilization stage of development, which science today confirms. And not being a scientist myself, I'll be relying on the findings of Answers in Genesis, who note, from the moment of fertilization, a new human being is either male or female. While it will be some time before the biological sex of a developing child is visible, it is defined by the presence or absence of a Y chromosome. An individual with XX chromosomes is a female, and an individual with XY chromosomes is male. Right? Which means three things. First, because women only have XX chromosomes, the Y1 for a boy didn't come from the mother, meaning that developing body is a different body than hers. Second, fertilization is the combining of chromosomes from the mother and the father, which makes a unique set of chromosomes that has never existed before, and therefore distinct from both the father's body and the mother's body. And third, being determined male or female at fertilization is being made in the image of God, meaning at least as early as fertilization, a person becomes very valuable to God. The science today, unsurprisingly, agrees with God in Scripture. So continuing to carry and give birth to that child in the womb is the only way to protect and value that child's life and future as God does. But how does that highly value the mother's life and future? Because it protects her life and future from the damage abortion does to her. Spiritual, emotional, psychological, physical. As Proverbs 8:36 warns, he who sins against me wrongs his own soul. The context here being sin that causes death. Or in Habakkuk 2:10, God says, you have devised shame for your house by cutting off many peoples and sinning against your own soul. Right? Abortion not only traumatizes the woman's soul with sin against God and feelings of shame, but spiritually damaging one's soul has holistic impact for everything else. As Proverbs 17:22 warns, a crushed spirit dries up the bones, right? It impacts her body's health. And 3 John, be in health just as your soul prospers, right? Which means a woman who traumatizes her spirit by abortion also traumatizes her health. God's warning here about the damage abortion does to a woman, today's studies, again, unsurprisingly confirms, is happening in real life. From the National Center for Biotechnology Information, a Canadian study tracked 1.2 million pregnant women over 16 years, right? So a pretty thorough study, and found women who had an abortion had an 80% higher risk of substance abuse, a 100% higher risk of mental health hospitalizations, a 150% higher risk of suicide attempts. Also focused on the family, reported a Finland study that listed those mental health issues as depression, fear of infertility, right? Who knew abortion could cause infertility? Abnormal eating behaviors, decreased self-esteem, nightmares, guilt and regret. In other words, shame. And that's just the mental, emotional, psychological trauma from having an abortion. And then they reported the physical ones from the site Medscape. Every 1 in 5 women experience multiple physical complications as a direct result of their abortion, such as hemorrhaging, perforation of the uterus, cardiac arrest, endotoxic shock, injuries to adjacent organs, infection resulting in hospitalization, convulsions, on and on. 20% of post-abortive women experience these and other side effects ranging from mild to severe in gravity. I wonder if the women who go for an abortion for reasons of protecting their future are advised that having an abortion could actually derail their future altogether. Or if the reason is sexual assault, a woman might feel abortion will end his victimization of her, but to do so is subjecting herself to the victimization of the medical system that will damage her further. So carrying and bearing that child is the only way to protect and highly value that child's life and future as God does, and protect and highly value that woman's life and future as God does. And third, it's the only way to protect God's plan to value the life and future of that new family. Right, so regardless how the child was received or the reasons for wanting an abortion, right, we're going to look at 2 narratives in which God demonstrates just how valuable that new family is to him. Now I would encourage you to read the stories fully for yourself, as we'll just be taking snippets of each. Right, so first, Genesis 16, 1-3. Now Sarah, Abraham's wife, had borne him no children, but she had an Egyptian servant/slave named Hagar. Then Sarah, Abraham's wife, took Hagar and the maid, the Egyptian, and gave her to her husband Abraham to be his wife. Hagar is a foreigner and a slave, which the words, right, took Hagar and gave Hagar to Abraham, who's 85 at this time, sure sounds like she's an unwilling participant being used as the slave she is, a piece of property, a dehumanized incubator. Sarah even admits by verse 5 how wrong this was. Right? But whether scholars frame this as sexual exploitation, abuse of power, or rape, God says to Hagar, "Behold, you are with child, and you shall bear a son, and you shall call his name Ishmael, because the Lord has heard your affliction." Right? So first, God names Ishmael while still in the womb, showing God values and is just as attentive to him as any child he's named in the womb, regardless of the circumstances of his conception. And second, God speaks to Hagar in her affliction, acknowledging he's aware of her pain. He's validating her pain, showing he values and cares for her too. And then God further says of Ishmael, "I will bless him. I will make him fruitful, and I will multiply him exceedingly. He shall be the father of 12 princes, and I will make him a great nation." Blessed him to be fruitful and multiply. Sounds just like with Adam and Eve in Genesis chapter 1, who he blessed to be fruitful and multiply. Right, so regardless of how Ishmael was conceived, God has a plan and a purpose for Ishmael's life. Not only to perform his general will, right, that humans fill the earth, but God's specific will of making him king over his own nation. But then Abraham and Sarah expel Hagar and Ishmael from their home. Abraham took some food and a skin of water and gave them to Hagar. He set them on her shoulders and then set her off with the boy. She went on her way and wandered in the desert. Right, so Hagar's now a single mom, impoverished, homeless, runs out of food and water, father's not in the picture, bleak environment to raise a child, right? Many reasons given today for having an abortion. But here's how God values his family. "Fear not, for God has heard the voice of the lad where he is. Arise, lift up the lad, and hold him with your hand, for I will make him a great nation." Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. And she went and filled the skin of water and gave the lad a drink. So God was with the lad, and he grew and dwelt in the wilderness and became an archer. Right? So even if a woman conceives like Hagar, through the abuse of sexual exploitation, abuse of power, or rape, and like Hagar has nothing ahead but a grim future of struggle and poverty, circumstances too awful for any mother or child, God is with that single-parent family and has a plan for them. As he promised to be with every family in affliction. In Deuteronomy 10:18, he defends the cause of the fatherless and the widow, and loves the foreigner residing among you, giving them food and clothing. Or Psalm 68:5, a father to the fatherless, a defender of widows is God in his holy dwelling. Or Psalm 103:6, the Lord works righteousness and justice for all who are oppressed. God values and cares for afflicted mothers and their afflicted children. Any afflicted family who receive their need from the Lord, as Hagar did, just by accepting it. And one more biblical example of a story that has it all: sexual exploitation, prostitution, hypocrisy, deception, blackmail, all between a father-in-law, Judah, and his daughter-in-law, Tamar. Yes, the father of the tribe of Judah. Now, I'll let you read the story for yourself from Genesis 38, but through this predatory, transactional, shameful one-night stand, again, reasons given today for wanting an abortion, Tamar becomes pregnant and gives birth to twin boys named Perez and Zerah. God using Zerah's family line to supply praise music and godly wisdom to his people. And through Perez's family line, God went on to produce King David and then Jesus. Right, these are just two stories from the Bible where God provides answers for most of the reasons women today give for wanting an abortion. His answers being his care, his compassion, his love, his provision of needs, his plan and purpose for that family's life and future. God himself being the father to that new family. Right? So regardless of circumstances of a child's conception, or the bleak environment in which he'll be raised, or the many other reasons for wanting an abortion, carrying and giving birth to that child is the only way to protect and value that child's life and future as God does. That woman's life and future as God does. And God's plan for valuing the life and future of that new family. And so Christians likewise advocate the value and protection of every child in the womb, of every mother carrying a child and their family. Which Christians can do personally with those you know, or those you don't know you can support financially by supporting Christian parachurch organizations like Compassion Place in Midland, who say, we are committed to providing a safe place for the emotional and practical support often needed when faced with an unexpected or difficult pregnancy situation. We are also committed to serving those in our community with compassion, care, and support. And there's also Envisage in Barrie. When pregnancy is unexpected, it can be hard to picture how the future might look. Envisage provides a safe, confidential place to explore your pregnancy options. Please note, Envisage is not a medical clinic. We do not provide or make arrangements for abortion. So whether a mother goes on to raise that child herself or gives him up for adoption, God values every mother and the child she carries the same way God values you. From fertilization to the grave, as his image made very good by God, with his same value and care that he does for any one of us in affliction. And for that, let's close by standing and giving God his praise this morning.